Do you want to annoy the enemy team? Knock them out of position constantly. Stun them from a long range. Make them scared to parry anyone else on your team during a fight. Boy, do I have a character for you. Hey, hi, how are you? My name's Felt, and welcome to my beginner's guide to Viscous. Now, Viscous isn't the most popular character at the moment, considering they've gotten their gun nerfed, and then their ball nerfed, and their puddle punch nerfed. And it makes it kind of hard to be like, yes, they're a great character, and they're so top tier, but I think that Viscous's strengths lie in the fact that they are a unique character that can cause problems for the enemy team in ways that they're not ready for most of the time. And I know that Puddle Punch is not the most popular version of Viscous at the moment. Don't worry, there are in fact 2 builds down in the description below. I will mostly be talking about the Puddle Punch one because it's how I prefer to play them, and it's how I started learning them, and it made me feel like I could actually play the character and do stuff on them without having to worry about how do I hit every ricochet of the splatter, or how do I pilot the goo ball most efficiently. So this is the build that I'm going to be talking about the most. Like I said, the other build will be down in the description. It will be annotated and all that stuff like all my builds are, so don't worry. Now, before you learn a character and learn their builds, you really have to learn what they do first. And for Viscous, we actually have to talk about their weapon first. Everyone in this game has a unique weapon, but most of them are pretty straightforward. Of you have a left click and then you zoom with the right click. Well, Viscous actually shoots with the left click and then shoots a unique goo ball projectile with the right click that has a bigger AoE than you'd expect and is really good for poking people around corners. Now, Viscous's gun has gotten nerfed quite a few times because for a while there, gun Viscous was just as good as the Hazes and Wraiths of the game, but even in its current state, a little worse than it used to be. I still think the gun is very strong, and I think the ability to poke people around corners effectively with the right click gives it a really great way to shine. Viscous's first ability is called Splatter. You throw a ball of goo that deals damage and leaves puddles of goo behind that apply a movement slow to enemies in the radius. It by default does 70 damage, it has a scaling of 0.8 to your spirit power by default, and it bounces once off of any surface that it lands on. Multiple hits to the same target deal less damage, and goo puddle lingers on the ground and applies a movement slow to enemies walking on them. Now that's really interesting that they mention it twice, but as is tradition in these videos, I read the whole description out loud. Another interesting fun fact about it, though, is that you and your allies slide faster on the goo puddles, meaning that if you're shooting on the ground and making a bunch of goo puddles everywhere, if you have any M1 carries that like to slide around, like, say, Viper, they'll be zipping through them without realizing it. The ability is really strong. It's a really big burst option for Viscous, and is the core of a lot of their builds at the moment that aren't focused on Puddle Punch. Now, the upgrades for Splatter are generally straightforward. So the first level is plus damage and plus radius, meaning it's easier to hit. Its radius goes up to 7 meters from 5. Its second upgrade is minus 14 seconds of cooldowns. Instead of 26 seconds, it's at a 12-second cooldown. But the final upgrade is the most important one. It makes it bounce 2 additional times, meaning it bounces 3 times total, and improves the spirit scaling up to 1.9, which is a crazy amount of spirit scaling for an ability as far as Deadlock goes. That means you're almost getting double value out of any spirit power that you have in your build, and that's just crazy. Now, as for the damage reduction that's mentioned in the ability, I'm mentioning that last because it's kind of complicated, because once you get up to it bouncing 3 times, it means that you can hit 4 total times. And the stuff that I've found, as far as the actual real numbers behind the reduced damage, is that the first hit will do full damage, the second hit does 50% damage, the third hit does 38% damage, and the fourth hit does 26% damage of your base damage number. Now, overall, this means that hitting splatter bounces is still really effective, because if you hit 2 bounces early game, that's 150% of your base damage, right? Or, well, sorry, 50% extra of the base damage on the ability. So you still want to hit bounces. It's just not obscenely overpowered to the point of it's going to hit for 500 damage 4 times in a row in the late game. It's not quite that strong, but it is still very, very good. The Cube. The Cube is a really good ability. It is a 42-second cooldown by default, which should tell you a lot about how good it is. You encase the target in a cube of restorative goo that protects from damage and increases health regen. Target is unable to take any new actions while cubed, but can be used on self, and you can press the spacebar to escape early. Spacebar is just the default keybind, I believe. Whatever your keybind is will be potentially different, but the game shows it on the screen when you're in the cube. The ability has 40 health regen by default, scaling with your spirit power at a 0.3 rate, and it lasts for 3 seconds. This is a really good ability. It can be used for just extra health regen in the early game, It can be used to make people avoid big burst damage in the mid to late game, and we'll talk about more uses for it after I finish reading its upgrades, because those upgrades are important. The first upgrade, which is a really odd sounding one, is it increases move speed and stamina recovery. But after you upgrade it, you can see that it says after exiting the cube, the target has increased move speed and stamina recovery for a short duration. So it's not truly inside of the cube you get those things. It's after you leave, you get 2.5 meters of move speed, 30% increased stamina recovery speed, and this lasts for 8 seconds, making this a really good save someone from getting hit and then help them get out by having them have more movement speed and stamina recovery after they get out of the cube. This is a really, really good supportive tool and just good tool in general. The next two upgrades are also pretty straightforward. You get plus 25 health regen, taking you up to 65 base, and an extra second of duration, which adds a lot more health regen to the ability overall. And then the final upgrade, and possibly the strongest upgrade for the cube, and why any support Viscous out there usually has the cube maxed out as fast as possible. When you put someone in the cube, it removes all non-ult debuffs. That's a really powerful effect. That means that Mirage debuffs, any escalating exposure debuffs, Infernus debuffs, Mina debuffs, Shivs, Shiv Dash, any and all those things that you can think of off the top of your head, immediately removed. It's a Dispel Magic on a 17-second cooldown, which I believe, if we look at Dispel Magic up here, is faster than Dispel Magic. Yeah, it dispels 45 seconds. This is at 17 seconds late game, and it comes with even more buffs after you get out of it. The cube is quite strong, and it is really a core part of why I think that Viscous is still seeing so much play, even at the highest level, when a lot of the rest of their kit seems to have been nerfed over the years. The cube being so strong really helps it. Puddle Punch. The reason I started playing Viscous in the first place, my favorite ability. It's a really, really good ability. It has one charge by default, has a 1.7 second time between charges, a 24-second cooldown, you can cast it up to 40 meters away, and it has a 4-meter radius. Materialize a fist in the world that punches everyone in the area applying knock-up, a very powerful debuff in case you aren't aware. Punching an enemy deals melee damage and applies a slow. You and your allies have increased air control when you're affected by the punch in the first place. Base damage is at 58, but that does scale with your weapon damage and your level, the way that a lot of other melee damage stuff does. It applies a 20% move speed slow to the enemy by default. They are displaced by 0.6 seconds, so they knock up into the air by default. It is a 4-second slow duration when it is applied to them, and it is just a really fun ability. It does apply all on-hit melee effects that you could imagine, but that also means that it is parryable. Unlike some other characters' melee abilities, Puddle Punch is very much a parryable ability, so don't be surprised if people buy Rebuttal against you and then parry you every time you try and Puddle Punch them. If you're good at making it so that you're not doing it at like a very normalized rhythm, you'll usually get people off their game and get them to parry a bunch of nothing, or you can get them to parry the Puddle Punch, and then you get to melee them right afterwards with your actual melee, or just splatter them for big damage. This ability has a lot of play around it because you can use it to move people out of position, or you can use it to help your teammates get shoved back into position. If you watched one of my recent videos about fun random facts in Deadlock, you can Puddle Punch people who are cubed. This is a very cool and strong ability. The upgrades are quite straightforward for it for the most part. The first level gives you an extra charge and 20 base damage on it. The second level gives you an extra 1.5 meters of radius, and just has 40% lifesteal on the ability now, which makes it a really good way to keep yourself sustained if you are using this as one of your predominant ways of fighting. And at max level, the most interesting one is minus 12 seconds of cooldown, so 12-second cooldown by default for the punches. And it now deals heavy melee damage, meaning that any item that cares about dealing heavy melee damage to get either the most out of its effect or apply an additional effect, Puddle Punch will apply that. Now, this doesn't apply to everything. It can break Graves ult, for example, but it cannot break stuff like bridge buffs, center sacrifices, or the Rejuvenator Crystal. Last but certainly not least is Goo Ball, Viscous' ultimate ability. Base cooldown of 130 seconds, 11 seconds duration. You morph into a large goo ball that deals damage and stuns enemies on impact. Ball grants large amount of bullet and spirit resist, that's a lie. Bounces off of walls and can double jump. It actually has a lot more to it than that. You get a lot of momentum rolling when you're inside the ball, and you can accelerate at a really high rate when you're inside of it. And as a result, learning how to control the ball is a pretty integral part of learning how to be a good Viscous. Goo Ball is the ability that throws me the most when I play them at the moment. I've learned a lot about how to use splatter and the cube effectively. I really love puddle punch stuff, but learning how to navigate in the Goo Ball and not get caught on stuff is something that still escapes me sometimes. It's an ability that you should practice with if you want to be a really good Viscous. Let's talk numbers. Goo Ball is 110 damage when you hit someone. It scales at 1 times your spirit power. It has a 0.5 second stun duration. You have a 1.4 meter radius by default. And you get 35% spirit and bullet resist. In case you're wondering why I said the resists are a joke, it's because these numbers used to be much higher, and they nerfed them simply because Goo was a little too tanky inside of the Goo Ball form. I think that they could stand to bring them up a little bit, but that is neither here nor there for the guide. As far as upgrades go, the first 2 levels are pretty straightforward. 30 seconds of cooldown and 70 base damage. The max level, not that exciting, but a tiny bit more complicated. You get 6 extra seconds of duration on it, and you stun people for 0.3 seconds longer. Now, weird fun fact, you can in fact double jump and then dash down onto someone's head and kind of dribble yourself like a basketball on top of them. This used to be a way to infinitely stun people, but that has been taken out because of how they reworked stun durations both on the ability and in general in the game. Overall, Goo Ball is strong in team fights where you're just trying to chase people down and stun them out and knock people out of important abilities, but it is definitely not something that you need to think, oh, I'm so tanky inside of it. It's usually an initiation tool, an escape tool, or something to try and stun people out of important abilities with. Other final notes about Goo Ball is that while you can't carry Urn in it, you can use all of your abilities inside of it, as well as all of your active abilities inside of it, like your active items inside of it. All of these things together are part of the reason why I think it's been nerfed a few times. It is a very strong ability with how much you can do while in a giant rolling tanky ball. Let's talk build now. So as far as the build goes, the leveling order is pretty straightforward. I like putting points into Puddle Punch to max it out first, and then I put a couple of points into Splatter so I can use it more in the mid game because of things that we'll talk about later in the build. Then I end up maxing out the cube, max Splatter, and then put points into Goo Ball. You can put 1 point into Goo Ball earlier to get that 30-second cooldown back so that the ability goes down to its 100-second cooldown instead of being at its 130 a little bit earlier, but I just don't use Goo Ball that much outside of an escape tool or a fight the urn tool, and usually I have more than enough time for it to come off cooldown to not need to put that extra 30-second cooldown onto the ability early. This is just how I like to do it. Feel free to edit builds at your own discretion. That's kind of why the copy and edit function exists. So let's talk actual items in the build. First up is Melee Lifesteal. This item is really, really good. The heal is 30% as effective versus non-heroes, meaning you only heal 30 if you hit a minion. But the cooldown is 1.5x as long for light melee hits. However, you can still just tap someone with a light melee as you're fighting them and just get that little bit of extra cooldown going. You don't have to do a heavy melee. This does proc on Puddle Punch, which is the most important thing, but it will be a light melee until you get the ability maxed. Next up is Spirit Strike. A little bit of Spirit Resist Shred, a little bit of Spirit damage on it. It's just a good item. By the time you have Spirit Strike finished and you're getting into your next item, you should probably have Splatter available. When you have Splatter available, try and make sure you hit a melee with a Spirit Strike on it to shred that 6% Spirit Res to make Splatter hit even harder if you can. Next up is Opening Rounds, an item that, despite adjustments and nerfs, I still think is crazy good on Viscous. 4 Spirit Power is still 4 Spirit Power, 8 weapon damage is still 8 weapon damage. 60% bullet velocity is quite nice. Viscous bullets aren't slow, but the right click does benefit from this as well. And that extra little bit of weapon damage on people who are high health does apply to basically everything we want to be doing. It's great. I then go Mystic Expansion into Extra Charge because I like to make my punches a bit more consistent and a bit more spammable. Next item is Recharging Rush, something that just really helps us get back charges of our Puddle Punch. If you hit someone with a punch and then shoot them a few times, you should typically get a charge back. 25-second cooldown is a little long, but that's about how long a normal charge cooldown is before max level anyways, so you should be good. Next up is Melee Charge, which, as you might think, the best part of the passive is the 25% bonus heavy damage. Well, the reason it's here in the build and not any sooner is because it is after 7,700 souls, which should be, unless all the wikis are wrong, heaven forbid, when you get the 8th point you need in order to fully max out Puddle Punch so that it is doing heavy melee damage. The other reason I do the beginning of the build like this is because it gets us our weapon investment, meaning that our melee does even more damage overall. As you can see, by default, our heavy melee is 179 damage, meaning that by the point that you are here in the build, Puddle Punch almost self-procs with Charging Rush, and if it doesn't, it just takes a couple of shots afterwards. Overall, it makes for a very powerful early spike to the game. While it's not super survivable, there are options over here on the side to help you survive to get to this point. We're going to be skipping these two optional things for a second here. We'll get into all the optional stuff after I go through the base version of the build. Next up is just Battle Vest. It's just my default go-to at the moment because that extra weapon damage does add on to Puddle Punch, and if you're going to be shooting your gun in general anyways, it's just a pretty good item to have. The out of combat regen, the bullet resist, the fire rate, all of these are just generally good stats and make Viscous pretty good at roaming around the map, and it just makes you more survivable. Next up is Life Strike, great item for Viscous, especially if you are definitely hard committing to the Puddle Punch build. It adds a big slow, gives you big heals, even more big heals after the fact. It's just really, really good. Plus extra melee damage on it, which is a little bit more than the melee damage given from melee lifesteal, plus bonus health to make you even more survivable. These finish out your green spike next. So at around the 12k mark, you should have your green spike finished out, so you are able to start roaming around the map, being a little tankier, but mostly being able to survive by using Life Strike to sap life away from the enemies. Next up is Spirit Snatch, a very powerful item at the moment. This item has been adjusted and nerfed so many times over the years, but right now it is quite good. It takes away 12% spirit resist, you take away 25 spirit power, and you deal 66 spirit damage, all of which are just really good base numbers. Fun fact, the spirit damage does scale with spirit power, so it's actually a little higher than it does at base. It's 50 at base. We're talking about at this point in the build anyways. This is now just really good item to finish out your spirit spike with, because you will get to that 4.8k spike, and now if you hit a melee on someone and then hit a splatter on someone right afterwards, you'll be doing really big chunk of damage to them because of the spirit power and spirit resist steal. Plus it'll just make any spirit heroes on the enemy team a little less potent because you're going to just keep stealing spirit power from them. After Spirit Snatch, I like to commit to getting a bit more obnoxious in the build. I like getting Rapid Recharge online. After Rapid Recharge is online, you have a very spammable punch, and around the 16.8k mark, you're probably going to be fighting over Urn quite a bit, or if nothing else, fighting over Walkers and Guardians quite a bit. And so at this point, you are going to be a menace. You're going to show up to a fight, you're going to bounce around the enemy team, you're going to bounce around your team, and people are going to just be mad that you're there. Because we are already pretty survivable with Battle Vest and Life Strike, this is a pretty solid next upgrade, even though this build is quite economical at this point in the game. The next two items are potentially skippable for a little bit if you really want to get a big power spike of Crushing Fists online, but I find that they're both so strong for the build and I really like them. Ballistic Enchantment is a very powerful ability for Puddle Punch because you get bonus weapon damage per stack. When you hit people, it stacks a lot. It doesn't say how many times it stacks per hero, which is a very odd thing, but you do get 20% weapon damage per unique hero hit. I'd assume that they don't expect you to get to 6 stacks, but you can. This does also stack off of non-heroes, meaning that if you hit minions and camps with it, you can stack up weapon damage off of hitting them as well. It also makes the punch just enormous and a lot harder for people to avoid, so if you've noticed that people aren't good at parrying your punch in the first place, this will make you even more obnoxious. Now, because of how they adjusted Ballistic Enchantment to build out of Mystic Expansion now, Greater Expansion is now an item that you just kind of have to buy in its entirety. That is worth noting. But it is still very good. It helps with everything that's going on in the build. It makes Goo Ball bigger, it makes Puddle Punch bigger, it makes Splatter bigger. It's just really good. The 10 Spirit Resist on it is also quite nice, and is overall just a pretty good item for the build. And as you'll see here, most of the build and most of the power spikes that you'd want to make your punches obnoxious and strong are online at 22,400 souls, and you don't have to go into any flex slots. Very, very good thing for builds, in my opinion, is to make it so that you can have a powerful base version of a build that is playable into the mid game, that is cheap enough to get online early, but you don't have to go into flex slots unless you are just lucky and get a Guardian down early. Next item worth mentioning, though, is an item that's going to get a whole little spiel about it. Crushing Fists. This item gives you a lot of stuff. It gives melee damage and bullet resist and heavy melee distance, and has 2 passives on it. The first one is the same one from Melee Charge, where you get 25% bonus heavy melee damage. Then the next one is your melee will restore ammo and apply a stacking bullet resist buff on enemies. Sorry, bullet resist debuff. It's a buff for you, it's a debuff for them. Heavy melees apply 2 stacks. If the target reaches max stacks, they will be stunned. These stacks stay on someone until they run out. You apply 2 per heavy melee, which your Puddle Punch is a heavy melee, so you will apply 2 per melee. So if you hit 3 Puddle Punches on someone, they get stunned. They have 4% bullet resist down per stack, which, by the way, melee damage kind of works with bullet resist because melee damage is kind of bullet damage. It's a little complicated, but overall, just know that this does help your Puddle Punch hit harder. You get ammo back so you can keep shooting people while you're bouncing them around the map. And since it's only 6 stacks to stun them, that is 3 Puddle Punches, like I said, and that's also only 3 punches to get them to max bullet resist down. You'll notice, though, that means that between Crushing Fists and Spirit Snatch, we are shredding 12% Spirit resistance with that, and 16% bullet resist with this. And it lasts for 8 seconds. So you are a walking debuff machine when you get both of these items online. And as you can see, we only have to have 27,200 total souls to get to this point of the build. This build is quite economical for the first part of it. It gets a little less so as we get into the other items. So that's the core base of the build that I like to build most games with no edits if I don't have to. However, let's talk about some of the optional items. Lane safety items include things like Healing Rite and Extra Regen to keep you alive. Grit, I think, is actually better than people are giving it credit for right now. Being able to just pop a 200 barrier shield when you're either diving and fighting people or getting dove and getting fought is invaluable. Plus, it has out-of-combat regen on it, which is just good. Rebuttal's also in here because if you're running around trying to punch people, people on the enemy team often try and run around and punch you as well, and you'll often get into little burger box scenarios all over the place. Plus, with how Urn works right now, there's going to be a lot of everyone just punching it out underneath Urn, so buying this item early for the first couple of Urn fights where you can just kind of get up in there and just spam parry, it'll be pretty nice because you get that parry cooldown and melee resist on it. If you don't want to go Battle Vest based on the enemy team's comp, there are some other options for you here. If you did go Grid in lane, you can turn it into Weapon Shielding, Spirit Shielding, or Reactive Barrier, depending on what you need. Spirit and Weapon Shielding got buffed pretty heavily recently, and I think they're much more worth a pickup now. Spirit Shielding feels a little better to pick up because people will burst you and then try and keep fighting you afterwards. Getting a 8-second barrier with a good chunk of Spirit Resist that scales with your level will be pretty nice. Weapon Shielding is also good. I find it's really good into characters like Viper and Haze. Other characters, not quite so much, but I know, again, to those two, Weapon Shielding has saved me quite a bit lately. Reactive Barrier is quite good into, like, Abrams, Bebop, Haze, Rim, characters that easily sleep you, silence you, all that type of stuff, and just cause problems for you. Debuff Reducer's in here in case you know you're going to go Unstop or Spellbreaker late game. It's kind of worth buying on its own. There's enough debuff resist items in the game to where Debuff Reducer doesn't feel bad to buy. The 90 base health on it also makes it feel a little better, but usually, unless I know I need Unstoppable, I won't be buying this. Now going into the mid game, we actually have quite a few options as well. For our safety items, you can once again just not get Battle Vest to get a lot of these. I think that a lot of the rest of the items are pretty core to the build. Battle Vest is the one that is the most flexible. You can argue that Opening Rounds is the next most flexible and the next one to go, but I'd make sure that you don't drop below your 4.8k gun spike if you're going to be dropping Opening Rounds. Make sure you've at least got Ballistic Enchantment first if you're going to be dropping it. Dropping Battle Vest also doesn't feel as bad anymore because we now have these slightly better dividers to where now there's a new breakpoint at the 6.4k mark to give you better health if you, say, need Dispel Magic and Lifestrike instead of Battle Vest and Lifestrike. Speaking of other optional safety items, Dispel Magic, Counterspell, Spirit Resilience are all in here because they're just good at keeping you alive. I prefer Warpstone over Bullet Resistance right now because Warpstone just has better resistances. It has 30% just like Bullet Resist does. It just has a teleport tied to it. So at that point, it just feels better. And also, if you're really getting shredded, you can just buy a Metal Skin as well. Once again, Unstoppable and Spellbreaker in here in case you started Debuff Reducer because you knew you needed one of them. Spellbreaker's not my favorite, but it is pretty good right now. It has a lot of Spirit Resist, a lot of Debuff Resist, a lot of bonus health that you otherwise don't have, and if someone hits you with any chunks of spirit damage, it does get reduced by 65%. And with characters like Grey Talon seeing a bit of a resurgence lately, it is pretty good. Unstop's mostly just, you want to not die while you're contesting Urn and mid-boss when you're in Goo Ball. It's very useful and very good. Now these last 4 sections are where stuff gets a little spicy and a little less beginner's guide and a little more you understand what you need to do with the character, but I still want to talk through it anyways, even with all the annotations on it. This is labeled Melee Cheese because both of these items give you melee damage that is pretty powerful, 25% additive melee damage when you pop Shadow Weave and come out of the cover, and Colossus gives you 30% additive on top of your normal melee damage. These are if you just want to go, all right, they're not building into melee resist, they're not parrying me very well, I want to do as much melee damage as possible. You buy them both, you punch people a lot, and you have a really fun time. Overall, I don't think they're usually worth a buy. I think Shadow Weave is still pretty much a meme item. Colossus is much more worth your time because when you pop it, you get the bullet resist, spirit resist buffs, plus you get 25% base health and 15% weapon damage on the item, making it just have generally good stats for you to buy. But overall, unless you know you need it because you're the frontliner, I'd rather just buy other items for my own sake. Speaking of buying other items, we have a section here called Support Goo, which is if you need to be the support for your team, you can buy support items. You have 3 slots in the build, and you can also sell opening rounds for a 4th slot to where you can buy 4 supporting items. You could buy up to 4 actives to help your team out. Speaking of the very good actives that you have options to buy and are quite good, Divine Barrier is number 1. Extra ability range on it, the ability to cleanse any debuff off of anybody, including stuff like Pocket Ult. This is just a really strong item right now. Rescue Beam is pretty great as well because you can stick someone in a cube and then Rescue Beam and drag them to you out of a fight without them taking any damage and just getting healed up massively. Phantom Strike is my preferred go-to way of taking down flyers because, for example, Vindicta, most Vindictas have Dispel Magic and Counterspell, meaning that Knockdown's not the best at taking them out. However, they usually don't have the reaction time to go, I need to counterspell this Phantom Strike. It's a little easier to hit, and also just gives you some pretty good stats that you like to have. The next 3 items are just other good items that you can build to be a good supporty character if your team needs support. Knockdown, better for people like Grey Talon 7 and Bebop, and potentially for hitting out Mo and Krill and Dynamo from their ultimates. Cursed Relics in here to take down either their biggest carry or people like Victor and Shiv, which you really need to stop. Disarming Hex is here as well because Disarming Hex is good, and when there's only one Gin carry on the enemy team that you need to worry about, it can really shut them down. Transcendent Cooldown also gets shoved into the support section because if you have 3 or 4 active items in your build, Transcendent Cooldown is worth the money investment to get them off cooldown faster. These next 2 sections are mostly here for fun, but there are some items in them that are worth grabbing in addition to the melee build, just to make the build stronger overall. Crippling Headshot is a very good item in general right now. Gives you 125 bonus health by default, but if you can hit a headshot, you shred 16% bullet resist, 16% spirit resist, and you take away 35% healing from whoever you hit. It's a very strong item that does a lot for you and your team and is overall typically worth the buy. It's not my favorite first go-to after I finish my base build, but it is an item worth keeping track of because your gun is pretty good at hitting people. Speaking of your gun being pretty good, Spellslinger is actually a really fun addition to the build that I've been toying with lately. Because of the fact that you can spam your melee punches so fast, you will usually get to max stacks of Spellslinger ridiculously fast. Combine that with being able to throw out cubes and splatters in the middle of fights, you will be able to go from having okay fire rate to the buffed 66% fire rate that Spellslinger provides you at max stacks, plus the 60% reload buff as well, meaning that you just kind of shred your way through people a lot faster than they'd expect in between all the punches that you hit them with. And if you're doing that and you're really having fun with that, you can also grab Lucky Shot as your final item. It's mostly here for fun. Like I said, I don't think this is a super serious good item for the build. I think Spellslinger has potential. I think Crippling Headshot has really good potential as well. Lucky Shot's here mostly as, well, your team needed another gun carry in the late game. You may as well morph into one because you are so malleable. Get it? It's because you're made of goo. But it's a pretty okay item. It used to be a lot more meta when gun goo was actually a possibility, but combine it with stuff like Spellsling and Crippling Headshot, you shred their protections, you get a massive fire rate boost, and then all of a sudden you're proccing these lucky bullets a lot more often than the enemy team thinks, and just generally causing them problems. You have a lot of orange in the build already, so getting these together will typically max out your orange investment, as you can see, so you will be able to just shred your way through people with your gun a lot faster than they will typically expect, plus this buffs your melee damage. Our final section down here for our final potential pivot is the Spirit Pivot. Once again, there's 4 items down here because we can sell opening rounds as we need to in the mid to late game to just fill up the slots and change into a better build for what is needed. If you're getting parried a ton, or the enemy team just has a lot of gun resist because you have a lot of gun characters and you don't want to go the gun pivot, you can hop onto the Spirit side of things. It is really expensive to finish these items out. You won't get to having all the items until you hit 51k souls, and that's after selling opening rounds. But this is a really strong potential set of items to throw into the build regardless of anything else. Echo Shard is the most optional, but it's really only here in case you just want to be able to go, alright, splatter, splatter, because they don't have Spellbreaker, and so your splatters are hitting them for a ton. Spirit Burn is the best item here because it is good anti-heal, and it is not super hard to proc. for Viscous. That 500 damage threshold is a little closer to hit than you think. Goo hits 340 by itself. Sorry, splatter. The goo ball, but not the goo ball. It's just fun to say goo, alright? Viewers, don't hurt me. Hitting a single hit and then a bounce off of it will usually proc it pretty easily and consistently, and if that doesn't proc it, usually the Mystic Reverb that you have bought will, making it so that you just hit someone with a splatter and then they just burn and everyone around them burns and they just have a generally bad time. Banal Spirit is just a good infusion of spirit power. It makes everything you do hit harder. Mystic Reverb is something that I'm not the biggest on, but I understand it's very good and is an item that you really should be getting if you're going to pivot into Spirit. The bonus base damage that you get is a lot on the first hit. The extra lifesteal is a lot, but this will only ever hit on the first hit of your splatter. It will never double proc. That's not how the ability works. So it'll only ever hit once. So it's not my favorite, but it is still very, very good. It also gives you a little bit of Spirit Lifesteal on top of the Spirit Lifesteal that gets imbued onto Splatter. So it makes the item just really strong, especially if you go the Echo Shard route. And Echo Shard is Echo Shard. Most people know what this is. It just gives you a second Splatter. All of what you just heard about the potential pivots is one of the reasons that I like Melee Viscous the most. The core of the Melee build is cheap enough that you can help your team in whatever way is needed. You can become the gun carry if you're ahead. You can become the support if you're like almost behind. You can become the spirit carry if you're ahead in a different way and your team doesn't have much spirit damage. Or you can just pivot to being a tanky frontliner. You have lots of options. And that's why I like Puddle Punch, because it's not super expensive to get into. It's less than 30k souls. I can't think of a game that has ended before I hit 30k souls recently, outside of maybe one where people disconnected from it. So it's pretty easy to get this entire portion of the build online by the end of the game, even if you're losing. There will be a second build in the description as well. This is the I'm Gonna Splat 'em build, which is a very splatter-focused build that finishes itself out around the 35k mark. As you can tell, this is around 8k souls more expensive than the other build, so it's a little longer to get online. But it is still a very, very strong build. You get to hit people with a super powerful splatter that will proc for a lot of damage with stuff like Spirit Burn and Mystic Reverb on it. I'm not going to talk through it because most of the items that matter are the same. I'm just going to make some special mentions here of if you're doing this build and you realize you're being the frontliner, more often than not, you can drop stuff like Echo Shard and Mystic Reverb and grab Scourge and Escalating Exposure. Get stuff like Witchmail, Diviner's Kevlar, and Magic Carpet to be a bit more tanky and a bit more ball-focused as well. This build is also available to have pivots, but it is still very, very focused on the splatter. So I'd really only go this build over the melee one if you're just a splatter enjoyer and you can really get the most out of the damage that it provides. As for some tips and tricks for Viscous to help you learn the character better, learn how to puddle punch yourself around the map. Because of the increased air control, jumping before you get hit is typically a good idea, because it makes you float through the air a little bit faster, a little bit better, and also not holding down the W key, because for some reason you seem to go a little bit slower if you're holding the W key when you're mid-air. You can see a difference right around here, because on that last one I was holding the W key and I had a lot less momentum rolling for me. And as I'm sure you'll realize, there are in fact lots of different crazy spots around the map that you can set up puddle punches to fling yourself and teammates around the map in different ways. The most important thing in my opinion is that you test where you want to be going and how to set up and go there. There's lots of guides around the internet showing off different start points where to set up puddle punches so that you go further and faster and just generally move better as Viscous. This is a beginner's guide though, so we're not getting too much into detail with it. I just want to let people know that those types of things do exist, and you should in fact go find them if you want to get better at launching yourself around the map. One final note, if you really want to be obnoxious and just zip around the map, Majestic Leap and Magic Carpet do give you massive amounts of air control, making you actually just kind of float your way through the sky. And if you can learn how to get your momentum rolling with this item, you will be able to float around, fly around, and just be kind of hard to catch, and probably just annoy the enemy team to no end because of the way that you just kind of float, flap, and fly about, and mix in stuff like Majestic Leap. I'm not very good at Viscous movement, and you can see how much further I'm moving off these puddle punches with the increased air control that these two items give you, including the minus gravity scale that Magic Carpet gives you. Small tip here, if you want to cube and then move yourself around the map, as you can see you get locked out of your abilities when you cube. So if you want to send yourself flying, you have to punch and then cube yourself and use all those things momentum-wise to get yourself out of danger while still being inside the cube that way. Punch and then cube to throw yourself around, but if you're just cubing an ally, you can cube them and then punch to try and set up the angle at which you want to throw them a little bit better. Splatter can be one of the more complicated parts of the kit if you're trying to be perfect with how you throw it, but something to remember is that it just kind of does its job if you throw it in the right general direction. The more important things to know is the right general directions to be throwing it. As you saw right there, throwing it into a small tier 1 camp will have it bounce around the room several times, and so in the early laning phase, even though you'll only have one bounce on splatter, hanging out over here so you can try and throw it in there to either steal the camp or just damage the enemy team a bunch will be pretty useful. The same general thing can be applied for trying to throw it into their shop, because if you throw it into the shop, you'll probably get at least one hit, if not two, and if you're the type of person who maxes splatter first, you'll be able to just bounce it off the inside of the shop several times in a row, just giving people a hard time. Because of how generally symmetrical the map is, it doesn't really matter what side you're on when you're trying to set up any of your splatters into different spots that'll hurt the enemy team. Going into, say, the shops in mid lane, it's pretty easy. You just kind of throw it near the point where they're going to be standing in order to pick up items, because then it'll probably bounce off the wall behind them and hit them twice. And you can do the exact same thing on the other side. You can do a lot of this from just the middle of the bridge without having to be too out of position. If you're really good at learning your angles, there are tons of different cheeky little spots you can stand in to where you're out of line of sight, but you can be throwing goo balls into their shop and still causing problems. And you can kind of do the same with trying to steal their small camps. This one's just a lot more difficult, but if I recall correctly, there is an angle around here where you can bounce it into their small camp, but it is a very tight angle and very hard to replicate. You're much better off if you're trying to steal the camp, going over here and just bouncing it off the wall immediately, because it's very easy angle to hit and you're on the other side of the veil so they can't see you. But if you do want to come in here, you can hit a better angle by bouncing it off the ground and then bouncing it off that wall afterwards. Or the opposite direction, you bounce it off the wall and then onto the ground. There's a lot of angles and it's a lot of little bits of practice, but it shouldn't take you that long to learn how to bounce splatters around. It's a fairly straightforward ability that just kind of follows normal, like, velocity rules. Goo Ball is the ability that has probably the biggest learning curve of all of the abilities for Goo. The thing that you have to remember is that if you want to go faster, you have to be holding down whatever button the game's telling you to go faster, and that you have to remember that you can double jump and then use a downwards dash in order to stop yourself in place. One of the more important things to know is that you can double jump and then downwards dash over and over and over again. And if you have people trapped in small rooms, like say this room right here, right next to mid lane, if you can get inside there and then jump and then downward slam over and over and over again because you have enough stamina, people will more or less be effectively stun locked. They're not stun locked anymore because Valve has changed that interaction to where you will get out of the stun eventually, but it is still something good to know. One other small tip for Goo Ball, besides the fact that you should remember that you can cast your abilities in it, is remember that because of Puddle Punch giving you better air control, it does in fact make you move around the map faster after you get hit by it, and you can use it to get out of situations a lot faster than you think you would be able to otherwise. Also, as you can see, you can use air vents while you're in Goo Ball to get up to different places. And you saw right there, you can get up to here and then bounce back and forth between these two side ramparts and be able to heavily contest the bridge buffs that spawn. So you have to remember that you can use your abilities inside of Goo Ball, which means that you can use Puddle Punch to throw yourself around and hurt enemies, but you could also use stuff like the cube to slow down your momentum so that you're moving less inside of Goo Ball to then make so that you can properly reposition how you want to go and then use a Puddle Punch after your cube ends in order to get out of where you are and get over to safety. It's one of those things that's going to take practice. It's one of those things that I still practice on the regular because it is a very complicated ability with really unique movement rules compared to a lot of the rest of this entire game. But overall, with a little bit of practice, you can be a Goo Ball master. Do not sweat it too much. It is not as daunting as most people think. Just like anything else in this game, though, if you want to be really good at it, you just have to get at it. Well, that's that. That's the beginner's guide to Viscous. I hope you learned something new. I hope you maybe look at Viscous in a bit of a different light. And I hope you think about playing this character in the future. I think they're really cool and fun. I think they've got a lot of unique aspects to their kit that other characters don't have. And I think that overall they're a character that everyone should try and play at some point or another. If for nothing else, then they have several abilities that play differently than the rest of the game and really show off the coolness of both the physics engine and just how the game can be played in a different way. Thanks for hanging out and watching. Y'all are cool and I appreciate you. And I hope to catch you all in the next one.